All right, and here we go live. All right. Welcome back to Firefly Free Code School. Got my nice technology set up for broadcasting put back together again. We have some exciting stuff to do. We're busily working at having the knowledge to connect our server-side applications to a database. And when we left off last week, the homework that I gave you was to dig into our really, honestly, clunky, janky JavaScript app we built that does CRUD operations on a collection of products and refactor it or rewrite the code so that it uses a real database on the back end. We got to the point where we got one query working to collect or select all products. And I give you homework to build out the rest of the functionality in similar fashion. Alexander, how'd you do getting through that?
Yeah, I got through to, like, I did everything except for the update. I got stuck on that.
Yeah, that one would be kind of interesting. Dana, were you able to get any of them working?
No, I didn't get very far at all. Okay,
totally fine. Why don't we do this, Alexandra, just to start, why don't you take us through the two that you did? And while we're doing it, I want to, after we've looked at it, I'd like Dana to reproduce the same thing and we can answer any of her questions along the way. And then we'll look at, I know you did more than two. And then we'll look at update and move forward from there. Do you mind sharing your screen and showing us what you got done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just to start, I made a model for the database first.
Oh, you did? Excellent.
Yeah.
So that allows Sqlize to do some nice magic to transition back and forth between the records in the database and the objects in our computer program. So yeah. Show us how you put that together and what it does for your program.
Okay, so it's mostly right here that it starts. It's basically just like recreating what we did in the workbench with like, this is like the ID and then the data type is integer. Right. It's a primary key, auto increments. The only weird thing was that it like assumes you do created at and updated at. So I just set those to false. That took me a while to figure out what was going on there.
Yeah. There's always a little bit of like, there's about an 80-20 rule. 80% of this stuff is pretty intuitive when you're working with an object relational mapper. The remaining 20% is how you earn your money because you have to just dig into it and kind of experiment and figure it out.
Yeah.
So, okay, good. So this model, it covers a couple of things we haven't talked about yet in JavaScript. Can you roll up towards the top?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to discuss line 13 with both of you. How much understanding do you have of what that code does, creating a class?
I understand like the concepts of classes, but I did like, this is something I looked up. So yeah. It wasn't something like I intuitively knew.
Totally. Dana, how about you? Like what's your concept of JavaScript classes, what they are, how they work?
Yeah, not much. I don't
okay.
know.
So let's just talk about classes independent of any particular language, because it's used in many programming languages. I talked about it without any code samples on our last class, describing the idea that inside your computer program, you could have the definition of what an object would look like if you were to have one. And I think I even used the word class because it's used in lots of languages. The same is true in JavaScript. A class is basically saying, hey, listen, here I am, I'm a computer program. And at some point, as I'm operating and responding to user input and executing my code, I might have need for an object, just a JavaScript object, that is formatted or structured in a specified way. So let me define what that would look like in terms of structure before I even have one of them for real. Think of it as a template or an abstract concept of an object type. In this case, the object type is called the products. I know it's pluralized, but it's just the definition for a type of object. And the terminology you'll start to get used to here is that it is the definition for an object of type products. You might have one that's an object of type orders or of type customers, for example. And all we're saying here is that for our program, if we in fact do need an object of type products, we'll look inside this definition that begins on line 13, and we'll look at the structure that's defined right there on line 23, because line 23 is inside the class. Line 23 is some behavior. And it says, hey, if I ever do need one of these, here's how to initialize one of them. Here's how to take the theoretical structure of a products object and make one for real. It's going to have an ID property. And remember, in JavaScript, objects are just collections of key value pairs. And those key value pairs, we can also call them properties. In this case, the properties are ID, price, SKU, name, etc. And so what we've defined here is a couple of things. First of all, just in terms of for one of these properties, like say, if you look down at line 32 on SKU, we know that when we need one of these products objects, one of the properties there is going to be a SKU property. And whatever its value is, our program should treat it as if it's a string. Now, that's valuable both to our program, but also to this highly specialized JavaScript library called Sqlize. That instruction that this SKU property, for example, is going to be considered to be a data type of string, that's even more valuable to Sqlize. Because what Sqlize needs to do is, if it takes one of these objects, say product number 5, whatever, and it's instructed to do anything relating to the database, it needs to be able to map between a type in JavaScript called string and a type down in the database called varchar. Because remember, that's what the string type is in the database, right? Is a varchar. And we don't need to wire that up. That just automatically happens via Sqlize. That's the value of a library like Sqlize or any other object relational mapper. It can take an in-program definition for an object. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at an in-program definition of an object called the products object. It can take that, look at all the properties, the key value pairs, and map them down to columns and rows in a database. Any questions so far? Okay. Now you can see that on line 26 through 29, that almost everything listed there is really for the benefit of the Sqlize library. I mean, we do know that the type of data is going to be an integer. Fine. Everything else, and that's really valuable in terms of our computer program. It needs to know what type of data. Almost everything else there, that relates to how Sqlize is going to work against that database we created. It knows that as far as that database is concerned, that this particular key value pair, this particular property, when it gets down into the database, that's the primary key. It knows, for example, that this particular key value pair, ID, when it gets down to the database, it's a primary key. When it gets down to the database, it's got this behavior called auto increment. And when it gets down to the database, you're not allowed to have null. Now, inside our computer program, we don't care about that too much. It's when we start working against that database that these little specifications on lines 26 through 29, they're really important. So I'm glad you did it this way, Alexander. That's really cool. It's actually part of what we're moving into. That's why I gave you the homework to start reading through and working through some of that Sqlize stuff. Okay, so you put this model class in here, right? And by the way, a model, let's look at line 13. Do you see that word extends? Do either of you have any idea what that word does? The word extends?
I think it's like there's like an existing class or something that's called model, and it's like adding on to it almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, if you look up on line 4, we can see where we got that class. We got it from the Sqlize library. Somewhere down inside the Sqlize code, which is super complicated. We're not going to dive into it. Somewhere down inside that Sqlize code that we added to our project is a definition for a class called a model. Now, this model terminology is something that you're going to have to become pretty familiar with. It's a class in your computer program that is designed to define an object that you know you're going to work with a database with. So the model is just another class. It's just another definition of a type of object. What about the extends? You said like, what was your verbiage you used about the extends thing?
Like it takes the existing class and then like takes that information from it, and then you can add on to it.
Absolutely. And here's an example. So inside a class, you can define 2 different things. And now we're talking about any language. It's got 2 different things you care about inside a class. It's a description of its structure, i.e. its appearance. That's the properties like ID, price, SKU, etc. So it's got structure. It's also got behavior. You can define the kinds of things that this type of object can do. Now look at line 23. Let's think about this carefully. Look at the word products. That's a class that we defined. On line 13, I know you copy pasted it, and that's fine. I do too, Alexandra. But on line 13, Alexandra's created a class called products. That's her class. She made it. She could have called it foobar, Alexandra, or product, or pro, or whatever. She could call it whatever you want. It's hers. But she is extending it from this other class that she didn't make called model. The programmers that made the Sqlize library made that class. And that class has, of course, both appearance and behavior. One of the behaviors that those other programmers created for the model class is a function inside it called init. So when you look at line 23, it's really interesting. We're taking the object or the class that Alexandra's defined called products, and because it inherits behavior from this other class, it can use a behavior called init that's in that model class. That's why we're allowed to call that function. We didn't make the init function. We don't even really 100% know what it looks like. We don't need to. We just know how to, we need to know how to make use of it. And when you look on the internet, it says, well, if you're going to use this init, which means initialize an example of this class, give it an object, lines 24 through, roll down to the bottom. Where's the curly brace at the end of 24? Right there. Lines 24 through 36 are expected as a parameter by this init function that we didn't even have to write. And in fact, if you like right there where you're at the end of line 23, right?
Yeah.
Hit backspace and then give me the open parentheses again.
Like right here.
Yep, get it. Now look, right in there, Visual Studio is being our friend. It's telling us what parameters this init function that we didn't even have to write expects. It expects a collection of attributes. Okay, well, we did that. ID, price, SKU, name, quantity description, those are attributes. After that, which is optional, it says there's different options. And look at lines 37 through 44. We gave it an object, which is a collection of key value pairs, and its options that can be used by this init function whenever it does its job. Go ahead and erase that second parentheses in parent there. Good. Okay, make all the red go away. So I'm going to restate that. Roll up again to where you define the class products. Okay. There's an existing class inside the Sqlize library called model. We are extending from that. Another verb you'll hear is that the products class inherits the characteristics and behavior of the model class. So our products class that we're defining inherits all that. Inside this products class, we've defined two things. We've defined a function on line 19. It's a function called associate. Now, associate, actually, we also inherit that from model. We don't even know 100% what that does yet. Okay. And then on line 23, we're defining an init function. We don't have to program that at all. We just have to give it a set of parameters. Nice and friendly. Okay, scroll down a little bit and see if there's anything more to this. There's our options. Yeah, that's it. Okay, good. So I want to take a little bit of a tour through that because you added this in, and I'm glad you did. So continue from there. Show us what you've done. You did create, delete, and read. You haven't done update, correct?
Correct.
Well, let's start with the read, because when we left off in our last class, we had implemented in read.js finding all products, so get all products on line 29. All right. So what you've been able to do, Dana, can you go and stop sharing your screen for a second, Alexandra? Right. Dana, I'd like you to show us your find all products, because it's probably very similar to what we left off with, right? On our last class?
Yeah, I just recloned what we had from the...
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so if we go to read.js and scroll down to get all products, notice that on line 40, we did not use very much of what Sqlize can do for us. In fact, we're being really mean to the Sqlize library. The Sqlize library is meant to handle creating the SQL on its own. If we need to read some data from a database, as you can see from Alexandra's, she didn't have to write any SQL. Here we did. And I wanted you to do this. This is what I wrote. Okay. If we look at line 40, we are crafting a SQL command, select star from products. And using the Sqlize library, we're sending that query, it's a SQL query, directly to the database. It connects to the database, executes the SQL, it receives back whatever the results are, and it assigns them to this variable called results, also defined on line 40. And then line 41, we log those results to the console. Now, the approach Alexandra took is the next evolution. It's the next step. So go ahead and stop sharing for a second, Dana. And Alexandra, show us what you did. So on her line 31, which is your line 40, Dana, notice that she doesn't have to create the SQL at all. Let's look at that object on line 31 called products. Show us what you bring that in on line 8, right?
Yeah.
Now here's what's really cool. Think about the chain here. Line 8 says, hey, over in the products.js file is something that we can export. It's a class called products. Show it to us again. Scroll up. It's on line 13. We've exported that. And remember, that class that Alexandra created inherits from model. And model has a bunch of behaviors, a bunch of functions, a bunch of things it can do. Okay, go back to read.js. So on line 31, when we start using this products object, we get access to all of the functionality contained in the class that it inherited from, the model class. And one of the behaviors is a function called find all. Find all creates all the SQL for us, and it connects to the database, and it sends that SQL to the database, and it receives the response, and it assigns it to the value. It assigns the response as the value to this variable called results on line 31. So Alexandra is cheating in all the right ways. Anything about what I just went over that you want me to repeat or didn't quite get? Okay. Now, before we go farther, what I want to do is I want to take at least one of these, and I want both of you to build it out without taking advantage of all this magic that Alexandra did. So we're going to do it by switching to Dana's screen. And Alexandra, even though you probably got it somewhere, I see it on line 16, okay? On line 16, you were able to get one single product by just calling this really cool function on line 16 called find one. That is built into the Sqlize library. All you have to do is pass it the where clause. But we're going to do it by crafting our own SQL. So when we get to that, you'll just comment it out. You'll comment out lines 16 through 19.
Okay.
Okay. All right, good. So go ahead and stop sharing. And Dana, you're going to share. The first thing I want to do is make sure that your application is working. So give me an npm start. Make sure you're in, oh, good. You're in 5 Live. That's the right. I think you might need to be in CLI product. Yeah, you need to move down into CLI products folder. You got to clip products there. Let me show you something kind of cool. Go to the end of that line, erase it all. Stop right there. Do CD space. Now I type the first 3 letters of the folder, CLI, hit tab. It auto-completes for you. As long as it's unambiguous, it'll figure it out. Okay, now do an npm start because you're in the actual project directory. All right, so let's see. In delete.js, you were trying to do something, right?
Yeah, it was at this point that I realized I wasn't sure what I was doing.
Okay, good, awesome, totally fine. So let's diagnose it. Okay, it says reference error. Sqlize is not defined, and that's on line 11, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's look at that for a second. On line 11, you're trying to create an instance of a class called Sqlize. The problem is, where do you think that class definition is? Where's the code that defines what the Sqlize class looks like?
Is it in the db.config?
No, it's actually part of the Sqlize library. If you go to your node modules folder, expand that, go down to Sqlize, expand that. Somewhere in here is an object called the Sqlize object. We're not going to dive through all that code. It's very gnarly. But that's where the definition for the Sqlize object is. You want to make an instance of one of these objects, which means in this file, delete.js, you need to reach down inside the Sqlize library that you imported and bring in that Sqlize definition. Go look at your read.js and you'll see how it's done. Scroll up and look at line 5. We've reached into the Sqlize library. That's the require Sqlize. And out of it, we've pulled the definition for an object called Sqlize. That's const Sqlize in the brackets. That's what's missing from your delete. Anywhere up at the top is fine, exactly. And the big problem is that on line 13, you're trying to use where it says new Sqlize with the capital S.
Mhm.
You're trying to use an object that you haven't got a definition for, or you didn't have one until you just added line 7. Now you do have a definition. You see that?
Yeah.
Good. Now give me an npm start and see if there's another error or if we can run. Okay, same thing, but in create. So you've got that in your clipboard. So you can collapse all of node modules. Yeah. Excellent. Go and try it again. And not a surprise, it's an update as well. All right. Okay, good. So we've got it running. Now, the only part that I know we got for sure is what we built in our last class, which is show all products. So give me an A for list all products. And that worked. You have 6 products in there, right? Okay, good. So we know that's working. The next thing we want to build is select an individual product by ID. So let's go to our read.js. And let's, first of all, let's look at the one that does work. The get all products works. And it works because on line 40, we've written a query to get the exact, to get all of the contents of the products table. Select star from products, gets everything from the products table down in the database, right? Now, what we need is we need to send SQL down to the database to retrieve an individual product. Now, you won't find yourself doing this very often, writing raw SQL like this for your program. But when I'm in the situation where I have to do it, I start down in the database. I don't try to write my SQL here. I write it in the database, and I know that it works in the database, and then I just copy and paste it. So go to your database. And on that complex DB, give yourself a new tab. And I want you to write some SQL that will find the details for an individual product by ID. And if you have any questions, ask us or ask Google.
I know it's not going to be star because star is
It is, because here's the thing. The star, and this is important for both of you, and for anybody watching this in the future, the thing that comes after the select word is not how many rows you want. It's which columns do you want. The where clause is where you can restrict it down to specific rows. So it is in fact star. What table?
From the products table.
Yep. So write products and stay on the same line. And now do a space and put your where clause. No, stay on the same line. It just makes it easier when you're pulling back into your computer program. And we're going to try to search by ID. So how would you do a where clause to match by ID?
Can I look that up?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Do not ever feel bad about looking things up. It's not a joke that we get paid to Google things. It's not a joke at all. Find by ID MySQL. Absolutely. That's an excellent search. What about that very first result? Look at that. Select star from entries where ID equals.
But isn't that going to give us just one specific?
That's what we're trying to do. Now, you're right. Oh, I see what you're asking. You're going to, like, if we put 2, it's only going to give us 2.
Yeah.
We'll handle that part in our code. What we want to make sure is that that we've got every other part of the syntax correct. So giving an ID equals whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or 6, semicolon, right? Now run all that bad boy and see if that syntax is correct. There it is. ID of 2, price 1,000, SKU is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. It's a sofa. You have 5 of them, and we have a description. So other than the 2, we know that that's the syntax we need, right? We know it works. Okay, go back to your code. And now let's look at line 40. That tells us, actually, everything from line 39 to 46 tells us how to do our syntax. So I would just copy lines 39 through 46. We know that it works to get all of them. So we're just going to tweak it a little bit. And so now go up to the get products by ID. And let's replace everything else in there. Now, that's going to be ugly to read because you included line 22 in your copy paste. I would go to the try word, go right before it and hit enter. There you go. All right. All right, now let's make this a little more readable. Take away the space right before the word try. And then lines 26 through 30, select them all and tab them over one row. Good. Now lines 24 and 25, select those and tab them over once. Now it's a little more easy to read. You have the try block inside those 2 curly braces. And then you have the catch block inside the curly braces. It's easier to read. You see it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what we care about is line 24. Line 24 is where you can take some SQL that you write and send it to the database. Well, we know most of what we need. So take your syntax from the database and put it in there. You don't need the oh no, copy paste it. This is a place where it's totally fine to stop copy paste because you know you got it right here. And there's an extra semicolon there at the end. Okay, good. Now, what I would do right now is I would run this and see if it works, even though it's hard-coded, only get product ID 2. Let's just make sure that it works. And then we'll figure out how to make it dynamic, how to make it use the ID that gets passed in. So go ahead and run it. Remember, 1 byte at a time. You change something, let's see if it works. All right, so, oh, on line 36, when we defined the function called get all products, we made it an asynchronous function. We need to do the same thing on this function called get product by ID. So export async. And then function, space function. All right, good. What does async do for us? Can either of you tell me?
Does it create a promise?
It lets us use promises. Absolutely. It lets us do code call, call a function and continue on even if that function isn't done. Okay, good. All right, let's go ahead and do an npm start. Awesome. Now do I for product by ID. I don't care what ID you put in. Don't put in 2. It was like 3. Now look, it gave us product 2. That worked. We successfully called the database. on line 24. Right? Now, the last thing we need to do is make it so that instead of hard coding it to 2, that we use the value of whatever ID got passed in. You see line 22 in the parentheses? It says ID. You see that, Dana?
Yeah.
That is coming from whatever the person pressed on the keyboard. We're grabbing that and we're passing it in when we call this function. So all you need to do is make a string, and you've got to take that 2, erase the 2, just the 2, hit a quote, and then do a plus because we're going to concatenate plus. Did you move the cursor? Do
No.
a Control Z. Go back to 2. You mean Control Z a couple times till you get back to 2. Okay, so just erase,
Mhm.
hit double quotes. Okay, now, yeah, you had added one. And do space, plus, space. And here's where we want whatever the ID is. So write ID, bring in that variable, space, and I do a plus again, space, and another quote. Now, it doesn't like something in here. It made 2 quotes for you, didn't it? Erase one of those quotes. Yeah, it's auto creating them. Give me a quote again. Move to the right one, and now erase. There you go. That's unfortunately Visual Studio being more helpful than it should be. So let's just think about this for a second. Inside, we do the Sqlize.query function call. And in the parentheses, we're passing a string. That string will be formed using the value of whatever ID got passed in. So if we type 3 like we did before, it should say select star from products where ID equals 3 and send that to the database. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So let's try it. Go ahead and run it. Give me an I. Let's do the 3 again. Try to select product 3. Look at that. It worked. Now, do you have, and by the way, if you do have questions, it's fine. Do you have any questions about what we just did in the get products by ID function?
Yeah, I don't know if this is just a syntax thing, but why are we adding the plus before and after the ID?
We're doing what's called string concatenation.
Mhm.
It takes one string and another string and puts them all together. You could even do it this way. Watch this. Take that word, take the letter ID or the word ID, delete it, and give me the number 2 in quotes. No, in quotes. Yeah, there you go. Now that is the same as what you had before. Now, I know it looks ugly,
Mhm.
but we take the first string, which is select star from products where ID equals space. We take the second string, the number 2. Now remember, it's not an integer, it's just a string because it's in quotes. And we take the third string, which is a semicolon. And the plus doesn't do math, it connects strings, it shoves them together into one string.
Is that the equivalent of what's happening here?
I didn't see your cursor.
Right here where I'm highlighted in the terminal.
Yes, exactly.
I understand.
We're creating a string that ends up being that exact way. So go ahead and erase the 2 in quotes and put ID back in there. It has to be lowercase. There you go. So yes, you can see there what got executed. That's just Sqlize is being friendly to you. It tells you what we got sent to the database. And that's the string that you made. Do you follow?
Yes, I do.
Awesome. Good job. Okay. So we could go on and do each of these that way. Take a look at delete.js. This is the one you had first worked on, right? When you went, oh, there's a problem.
Mhm.
So line 20 is where we start to make the remove product by ID function. Are you following along and doing your own coding, Alexandra?
Yeah, I was following it.
Awesome. Good. Okay. Here we have all this BS because we're using a collection of products that's really in a text table. It's really crappy. We can replace all of this by calling the database and saying, why don't you look up the syntax for removing a product by ID? And we can even do it. Remove row by ID. I know it said product, but the fact is we want to delete a row from a table, right? And then put MySQL. There we go. Yeah, click on that bad boy. To delete rows, use the delete from. Oh, look, they happen to use products as the example table. Do you see the syntax there? That would do it, right? So why don't you see if you can first get that to work down in your database, and secondly, make it work from your computer program. Ask for any help you need.
Can I just delete this one here?
Absolutely. It's your playground. Now, before you run it, because it's not going to work, why don't you tell me why it's not going to work? Do you have a column called product ID?
No.
Good. What column name do you need there? Yeah, good job. So run that, and you don't get anything beyond the green down at the bottom in the action output. You see it?
Yeah. So would I just, to confirm, select all from?
Absolutely. Now, before you execute this, and give me a semicolon, right? Before you execute this, comment out your delete. Anything where you're removing data, you have to be super careful of. It's 2 dashes and then a space. There you go. All right, so now you can run this whole bad boy and it won't execute the delete. All right. Select all. Look at that. Number 1's gone. So you know the correct syntax. So you should be able to reproduce this in your delete.
So am I doing the same syntax here, the export?
Yep.
Can I just copy all of this?
You can, but you're going to lose your function name. What's the function name in delete?
Remove product by ID.
Yeah, I would just copy what's inside it.
Okay.
Now stop for a second. Notice that you have selected 1 space before the word try. Just for readability. Yeah, there you go. I would go to the word let right before it. Don't include all those spaces because you want to start at the exact same spot. Yeah, there you go. All right. So what do you need to change to make this bad boy work?
Well, I'm changing this definitely.
Yeah, good job. I would copy paste just the part you want. Now, do you want that whole thing? Look at your code. Yes, genius. Stop. Where did you end off on your copy? What word did you end off on? Yeah. That should be it, except for this needs to be an asynchronous function because you're making use of this await keyword. So export async function. That should work. Let's see if we can delete something. All right, now let's see what we got back here. This is kind of weird. A result set is the results of a query in a database. A header is where metadata about something is kept. So this is a collection of metadata about a result set. So it says field count. That's how, fields are the same as columns. Well, no columns are handled. One row got affected. We didn't insert anything, so we didn't have to create an ID for anything inserted. There's no information. That looks like it worked. Now, why did we get that back? Look at our code and notice that we did a console.log of results. And that's what it sent back. It doesn't send back a list of all the products. Why would it? Go look at your database, your MySQL. What did it tell us? It didn't send anything back. There's a message at the bottom in the action output. And it says one row is affected. Because it's that one, the second from the bottom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we get the same kind of information from Sqlize. Sqlize received that same information. Hey, one row was affected. And so that's what it's telling us. So that worked. Now, I want you to do the same thing, but try to delete an ID that doesn't exist, like delete ID 99 or something. And before you hit enter on it, I want you guys to guess what's going to happen. What will it do?
Are we going to get an error?
Let's try it over in the database and see what happens. So what does it say? Now you just ran 2 queries. On line 3, you have a query, and on line 6, you have a query.
Mm-hmm. It
So
says 0 rows affected.
yeah, okay, good. So it didn't throw an error. So it probably won't throw an error in Sqlize, but we're not sure. Let's try it. Because remember, there's now a layer between your application and the database. That layer is this Sqlize code. Yeah, it just says affected rows, 0. Good job. Are you guys starting to see how this works? Good. Now, again, Alexander, there's nothing wrong with what you did at all. It's just the next evolution in our learning. But I wanted to work through this both for Dana's benefit, but also for you to see You can use Sqlize in a really gross way to just send raw SQL. Now, I want to show you something kind of interesting. Go to the read.js. And let's just look here at line 24. Click somewhere so not everything's highlighted. Yeah, good. Now, this ID on line 24, it's a variable, right? What if someone put for an ID a semicolon and then some valid SQL? Like delete an entire table SQL. Do me a favor, go ahead and Google delete entire table MySQL. Drop table. Click on that bad boy. Look at that. So what if instead of a number, we typed in semicolon drop table or drop table products? What would happen if we sent that to the database? Semicolon means stop executing the current SQL command and move on to what's immediately afterwards. Go to your MySQL workbench and look on line 3. There's a semicolon at the end. And then we're now looking for another SQL command and we find it on line 6. So we trust our users to put an actual number there, don't we? You can't trust. Go to the browser again and search for, listen very carefully to this, X K C D space. Oh, there it is, first result, drop table. Click on that. Click on that first link, exploits of mom. And now read this comic. Now, I know I'm a nerd. This is my favorite comic ever in the history of my entire life. Because that would work. That would actually work. Now, you guys both see how that would work? Someone types their first name as Robert, parentheses, semicolon, drop table students, semicolon, and that gets sent down to the database. And the database goes, oh, you want me to drop the table? Okay, and does it. Okay, go back to your code in Visual Studio Code. And look on line 24. That's why using raw SQL in your code is actually kind of dangerous, and it's not a recommended practice. We did it as just a step, the gradient of you learning what this Sqlize library can do for you. You can use it if you want to in this really scary, risky way to actually create your own SQL. But why not use some built-in functions that will test for things like that? Sanitizing your database inputs means things like before you actually execute something against the database, scan through whatever input was provided and see if it looks like code instead of content. See if there's semicolons in there. Let me ask you this. Any form that you've ever used on the internet, Would it ever make sense to you ever to put a semicolon in any of those forms? Never. And so if before you use something that the user created, the user entered it in, you could scan through it and make sure that there's no semicolons, for example. And if there are, won't use it. Sorry. That's in a very generalized way, sanitizing your database inputs. All right. So we're not going to do it that way. Let's look at get product by ID. You stop sharing for a second. Alexander, let's switch back over to you. And go ahead and revert it to what it was. Take away that code and then uncomment the rest. There you go. Everything that we had to do on line 22 is done on line 24 through 26. There's a function built into Sqlize called find one. It's used when you want to retrieve one record from a table that's down in the database. And you are crafting the SQL using code. The Sqlize library will make the code for you. So on line 25, if someone did pass in something that looked like Sqlize, looked like SQL for an ID, the Sqlize library takes care of that for you. It scans through it and wouldn't allow that. So it's safer to use. Now you have to trust that the programmers that made the Sqlize library did a good job with that, which is why you want to look for like how popular is something that you're going to use, how recently was it maintained, what's its reputation, that kind of thing. Any questions about that? Okay, good. All right, so now, Alexandra, let's look at the one that you did not get working. It was the update, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, totally. And it can be really ugly. Now, I would like to see what this looked like before. You've deleted all that, haven't you? And it's okay.
Yeah.
Totally
Yeah.
fine. Okay, you stop sharing for a second. And Dana?
Okay.
Actually, no, never mind, sorry. Alexander, put your screen back up. And let's just go look at it out on my GitHub account. Let's look at the file out there.
Okay.
I can't see that, by the way. So whenever you can, you can share it.
Hold on, let me reshare.
Yeah.
What was the?
Just do, it's called Complex DB, I think.
Just go.
Yeah, just go to Kairos.org and repositories. The top.
Yeah, sorry, the Zoom controls kept
Oh,
getting
I
in the
know,
way.
it's a pain. So go to repositories and is there a search bar at the top? Yeah, right. Just type complex and hit enter. Oh, what's it called? Let me look at my GitHub.
I think it's called CLI products.
Oh,
okay.
CLI-products. Yeah, it's right there at the top. Duh. Okay, so go down to operations update. All right, so let's just look at how we're doing this right now and see what do we need to change. Well, on line 14, we're retrieving we're using our get product by ID just so we can get some product details. And then we're showing those to the user with lines 16 through 21. We're putting them on the console. Hey, here's what the current data is. And then we do a prompt on line 24 that says, tell us what you'd like, please. And now we create a variable in line 26, which represents whatever the user entered. And finally, line 36 is where we're gonna have to completely rethink this. This remove product by ID thing. That's weird. Why do we delete it? Let's look at remove product by ID.
Would that be the,
It'll be in delete.js. Yeah, I don't know why we did that. That's wrong. So let's go back. What I want you to do is go to the update. And I want you to restore your update product by ID to the way it was. So copy that entire function.
okay. And then just paste it over.
Yep. Okay, so let's look at line 14. We do, in fact, need to get the current data for whatever product we want to update. So I think get a product by ID will work. Scroll up for a little bit. Yeah, let's look at line 6. We're bringing in the function called get product by ID from read.js. And read.js is going to be able to use Sqlize to get that data from the database, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have to change line 14. And now that we get all the data, it should log it to the console just fine. Let's test that that works properly. Run your program and let's try to update something. We'll stop midway through. We just want to see, will it read? Yeah, give me U for update. Choose one that you know exists, like 6 or 2, that's fine. All right, good. Now just don't do anything else. Let's just look here. So it executed select these columns, ID, price, SKU, name, quantity, description from products, where products.id equals 2. Okay, good. So it sent all that to the database and it worked. We retrieved the data. We logged it to the console. Hit enter. Interesting. Oh. It's doing a get, it's doing line 24. You see that? Hit enter again. Yeah, it's executing line 24. It's asking us in turn what the new price we want is, the SKU, so it isn't working the way we want to. I think I know why. Let's look at our get product by ID function. And let's look at line 28. Line 28 is why we saw those results. We called get product by ID from the other function, from the update function. We called this get product by ID function, didn't we? And it worked. It did line 24, which is where it connects to the database. And it found the specific row where the ID was, I think, 2, yeah. And then it did line 28, and it logged it to the console. Now, the reason we're running into a little bit of a problem here is because we haven't really kept what's called separation of concerns in. Look at your line 28. That is a user interface instruction. Now, I know it's a crappy little user interface because we're just using the console, but that is in fact a user interface. That does not belong inside code that interacts with the database. Let's go back to app.js. And let's go to the case of get an individual. There it is. This is where we've chosen to have all of our user interface stuff. It's in the app.js. And look on line 42. We call get product by ID, and we're supposed to get the results back. We're supposed to get back whatever it returns. Look at line 41. We create a variable called product. We call the function called get product by ID, and whatever it returns, we assign as the value of the variable called product. What does the get product by ID return? Look at it. Go look at the get product by ID function. It doesn't. This is me screwing up when we had our last class. I'm the one that introduced this really crappy pattern. Scroll down to get all products. And I did this on line 40. I did that just because we were running out of time and I wanted to make sure that it worked. But the fact is, we don't want to log anything to the console down in these functions. These functions are only for reaching out to the database and doing what we want to. They're not for user interface. So take away line 41. I want you both to do this. Just line 41.
Oh, 41. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, you were right. You were right. You were right. Line 40. Okay. Now, what happens is we execute line 39. It gets the collection of products from the database. It assigns them as the value of this variable called results. And then we return that variable called results to whoever called get all products. Where's the code that called get all products?
It'd be in app.js.
Yep. Dana, are you following that? Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. So let's look at that one. That's case A, right?
Yeah.
Good. So that works. Console.log, and we log whatever gets returned. Now look at I. The problem is that the console.log is happening in the wrong place. We didn't return anything from get product by ID. Go to look at get product by ID again, and you're both going to want to change this. On line 28, don't log anything.
Okay, so get rid of it.
Yep. Just return them. And it does. It returns the results. Good. All right. So let's run this again and let's test those two things, the get individual and get all. You'll have to do a Control-C at the bottom, I think, to kill this. Yeah. I want you both to test this. First, do a get all for A. Oh, this is interesting. This Sqlize is not going to play nice with our command line program. It's just not going to play nice. And I understand why. Because when we execute that SQL, go to your we're doing line 38, right? When we do A, it eventually ends up on line 38. And the problem is that that's an asynchronous call. And we're just waiting on it to finish. And the prompt library that we use for our command line thing wasn't built to work with that. So this is going to be really ugly and not a lot of fun to finish. Yeah, we're not going to get this to work very friendly, and that's fine. I don't care. Because here's the thing is, you would never really operate an app like this from the command line. That's not how you would do this at all. So instead, what we're going to do, we're going to table things here for a minute. And we're going to start to change this application a little bit, or build a new one that, let's just switch gears for a second. I know we're down in the weeds looking at a bunch of code. Okay. Let me go ahead and stop sharing for a second. And I'm going to share my screen. And I need to grab the iPad here. I want to show you a couple of things. Let's see if I can get this working again. It'll take a minute. It's been a little bit since I used the iPad and it's not all friendly. All right. There it is. Okay, so let's look at a very common way that the web applications that we use all the time work. You have a browser over here. And of course, this is also called a user agent. Why? Because there's a user, a human being, and they are using this browser, and it'll do work on their behalf. Okay, good. So let's look at the work it's going to do. It's going to send requests for web resources, web pages, videos, audio files, images. It's going to send requests to a web server. This is stuff that we've covered before, but if you have questions about any of this, stop me. It's totally fine. Now, this web server is where your application lives. The application very often will need to interact with a database like what we've been working on over the last few weeks. Let's look at the kind of communication that goes back and forth. A request goes this way and is formatted as hypertext transfer protocol request. We've looked at those a little bit. We're going to explore them a lot very soon. That request is received by your application. And you program what happens at that point. Very often, your application will need to interact with the database. Well, what gets sent to and from a database? SQL, as we've learned over the last few weeks. SQL goes in and result sets come back. Any questions about this right now? Okay, so let's look at how this part in the middle, this web server, works. You've got, say, a website. Here's a website. The website has a user interface that is in a person's browser. That's where the user interface is. That's what we get to see. That's in our browser. You might have 100,000 people logged into your website, and each one of them has a separate user interface because they've opened up their browser. All of those are capable of communicating with your web server. Any questions so far? Okay. One of the most common ways you set up this application on the web server is as what's called an API. Anybody tell me what that stands for?
Application programming interface.
Exactly, application programming interface. This is, you have application 1, you have application 2. What's in between controls how they can communicate. That's the API. What's in between? When you create your app that's going to live on this web server and you're calling it an API, it has a certain structure. Let's look at this app idea. That's a really bad square. In a little more detail. Remember, this is what's going to be down on the web server. It'll have kind of two parts. There's the API, and then there's all of the program functionality. Remember what I sketched here before. Here's application 1, here's application 2. This in-between piece is the API. What's program 1 and program 2 in this example that I created? Program 2 is whatever program functionality you're building. What does your program do? It might, for example, do CRUD operations on products. That's what we've been building. That's application 2 in our silly little example here. API is in between it and something else. What is application 1? Someone's browser, typically. The browser is a computer program, is it not? More than that, and we're going to explore this in detail pretty soon, the browser can actually execute JavaScript programs. They can be inside the browser. those can also work with the API. The point is that when you are building an application that's going to live on a web server, you can design it as an API. That means you can have one tiny part of it that other programs can interact with if they want to take advantage of your functionality. And you get to tell them exactly how to interact. Now, any computer program capable of connecting to your web server can send some kind of a request to that API. And if it's formatted correctly, and if the computer that sent it is allowed to do business with your API, which you can control, then you can take the request and you can pass it down into your program functionality and it'll do what it's supposed to do. Let's sketch that with some specifics. Let's say you have an API right up here, application program interface, and you have down inside your code, you have a function. This is a cursive F for function, and that function is called get products. Get all the products. And let's say you have a little document that you've made available on the internet to any computer programmer that says, hey, here's our API. It's called the Acme Products API, because we're the Acme Products company. We only sell the Coyotes, never Roadrunners. So here we are with the Acme Products API. And we have a document that says, if you want to see all of our products, then you need to send in a request that looks like this. API/products. If you send us that exact text, then we will send you back a list of all products. So let's say that this application, because this is all one application, is on a web server at acme.com. You guys following so far? Make that a little bit easier to see. Here's a web server, and it's acme.com's web server. And inside it is our app. Over here, this is Dana. And Dana is at her house and she's using her browser. Her browser sends the following to http://www.acme.com/API/products. Her browser sends that request. And through the magic of the internet, that request arrives at this computer. And it in fact arrives at this API. Your code that you wrote and your API code says, I want to see everything after the .com/. What's after that? Oh my goodness, look at that. It's some text that says API/products. And you go, oh, API/products? That's what came in? Let me send that to the function called get products. The function called get products reaches out to the database, gets back results, which is all the products, and it takes that collection. I'm going to put them in curly brackets. There's a collection of products, and it takes that and sends it back through the API, and the API sends it back to Dana. You see that again here. Dana's browser sends this request in. The application reaches out to the database, gets the data back, and the application sends it back to Dana. That's how this system works. And that's a lot of verbiage from me. Any questions so far? So let's look at our application, like the program functionality. In our really janky example application we've been using, this is in the operations folder. If we switch over here for a second, we can see in the operations folder, this is where the functionality is, correct? Now, we've been sending commands into that using the terminal. Really horrible way to do it. But that's how we've been doing it. We spin up the application, and with the terminal, we'll do an A or an I or whatever, right? That's not how programs work. There are some programs you operate from the command line, but not ones with a user interface. So the next evolution that we're going to go through is we're going to build this application as this. It'll have an API, and it'll have a set of functionality. It will not have a user interface. It'll simply have an API where we can send a request in, and the API will route that request to the correct functionality, and it'll send back a response. Whatever program receives the response, if it has a user interface, it can put it up on the screen somewhere. But that's what this looks like in this system right here. A browser happens to have a user interface. So if a browser sends a request into the API and then receives data back, it can display it on the screen if you want. But the choice of whether or not to put it in an actual user interface is up to the program that called the API. The API just gives you the data you asked for. That's all. So that's how we're going to build our application. It's going to use a lot of the exact same like principles, because our application is simply a credit app. Create, read, update, and delete for products. That's all it is. So a lot of the same logic is going to apply. We're going to have our set of functionality, which is the create, read, update, and delete functions. We know those work. Now, the update one is kind of janky. We haven't got that one working yet. It'll be a lot easier when it's not expected to produce any user interface. So we have about 80% of that code already done. We'll need to build an API that will receive the requests and route them to the create or read or update or delete, which will then send data back out of the API. Any questions about that? Okay, so that's our next thing we're going to do. Okay. What I'd like you guys to do in terms of homework is continue on with that Sqlize. Keep working through those practical labs. And again, reach out to me, Dana. I will get those videos caught up tomorrow. And I even have a favor to ask of you because there's 2 videos that I lost permanently. And they're right in the middle of this janky little CRUD app at the beginning of creating that. I'd like to, if you're available for an hour or two, do a one-on-one where we recreate that and record it.
Yeah, sure. That'd be fine.
Okay, good. I'll schedule that over the next couple of days. And that'll also help you understand that missing piece. And then we'll just insert it in the right order in the classes. Okay, cool. I know I went over a lot. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. Keep working through the Sqlize stuff, but just know that that's what we're going to start building next. Is we'll build this little CRUD app, but we'll build it in a more realistic fashion, where it can receive requests for a specific functionality to occur. It'll route that request to the right set of the code, which will do the work and send a response back. All right, cool. Great job. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you all next Monday.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Absolutely. Bye.